What's up, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. You're tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast live on Spreaker, Grandstand Sports Network, and Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Thank you for tuning in. As always, just wrapped up my take on Ronda Rousey. Spoke in great depth about Ronda. You know, I appreciate all she did for the UFC and for the sport of mixed martial arts. She brought it to a new level. But there's some things that had to be said. And I'll leave it at that. You guys tune in. Let me know what you think. If you're just tuning into this part right now, let me know what you think in terms of, you know, my take on that and much, much more. But where there is some, you know, frustration in terms of the Rousey to the WWE, there is light. There is light at the end of the tunnel. That light at the end of the tunnel is a fight that Dana White himself talked about post-UFC 220, a fight that I talked about post-UFC 220, and that is Stipe Miocic, the reigning, defending, undisputed UFC heavyweight champion, taking on the reigning, defending, undisputed UFC light heavyweight champion, Daniel Cormier. Will this fight come to fruition? It is a reality now. The Ultimate Fighting Championship announced that Stipe Miocic will defend his title against light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier at UFC 220 in July 7th, I should say. Not only that, Stipe and Daniel will be coaching opposite one another on the next season of The Ultimate Fighter, which premieres, I think, in, I want to say April. Might be February, maybe. I'm not sure when it premieres, to be honest. I thought it was April. But huge news. Huge news. I am so excited for this fight because unlike previous times where the UFC tried to do champion versus champion fights, you can look at, you know, Alvarez versus McGregor. You can look at Aldo versus Edgar. You know, you can look at, you know, Edgar didn't have the title at that time. They tried to do Aldo versus Pettis when Pettis was the champ. True champion versus a true champion. McGregor was Dana's nephew. Dana needed to get another belt around his waist for PR purposes. And McGregor never defended the featherweight title. There was never a doubt in my mind that he wouldn't. I knew that he was never going to fight again after he beat Jose Aldo. I said it moments after it happened. You can ask my dad. You can ask my buddy Eric. You can ask Tom. I said he will never, my buddy Tom, he will never fight at featherweight again. Never. And he never did, and he never will. He gets that title shot off of beating an undefeated fighter, granted, but he wasn't a champion versus champion. You know, Eddie Alvarez had neither fighter defended their title. Now, this champion versus champion fight with Miocic and DC, this is a fight where both guys have actually defended their belts. They've finished fights. They've owned their opposition outside of John Jones, obviously, but in the case of DC, he's 0-1-1. So that's what the record books say. So John Jones allowed him to become champion again. That's not DC's fault. That's John Jones' fault. Stipe Miocic has dispatched Fabricio Verdum to win the title, Alistair Overeem to defend it, Junior Dos Santos to defend it, and Francis Ngannou. 3 killers. I mean, Overeem is a tough son of a bitch. Francis Ngannou was slated to be the next big thing. Not so much. And to even win the title, Fabricio Verdum, who destroyed Cain Velasquez, got knocked out. KTFO'd. So this is a true super fight. This is the super fight. This is the best champion versus champion fight that the UFC has ever put on. Because Daniel Cormier is a former heavyweight. Not only is he a former heavyweight, he's a former undefeated heavyweight. Strikeforce Grand Prix winner back in the day, as well as owning victories at heavyweight over guys like Frank Mir, Josh Barnett, Roy Nelson, Bigfoot Silva. You know, he won the fights that he needed to win at heavyweight, he was a heavyweight. He dropped down to light heavyweight due to the fact that he was a guy that wanted to avoid Cain Velasquez. But Cain has had his fair share of injuries. DC had the class and the dignity to call Cain Velasquez and say, hey, buddy, I get this offer from the UFC. They think that I should fight Stipe Miocic, but I don't know if I want to take it. I think you might be next in line for that title shot. Cain had the decency and the dignity to say, I'm not getting a title shot, dude. I'm coming off a win that was 2 years ago at UFC 200. I beat Travis Brown. I think he probably thought that his grandma could beat Travis Brown at that time. So I'm not going to get the title shot. You take the shot. You deserve it. You've earned it. You did what you needed to do. Represented the UFC. I mean, Daniel Cormier, say what you want, but the point is a moot point now. It makes no sense. Makes no sense to doubt this guy, to throw hate, to throw shade on this guy, because he's done everything he possibly could for the UFC and then some. He's done everything that they would want him to do. He's promoted the UFC on Fox. He's been a great commentator on pay-per-view. And he has also respected the brand. And he's a family guy. So, and then in terms of Miocic, the same thing. The guy walks through fires. Literally, he's a fireman. What is a better sell than that? Two decent human beings, two educated human beings that have been the best in their weight classes the last 3, 4, 5 years. Two of the best fighters in MMA, pound for pound wise, they're right there. And now they're gonna fight for the baddest man on the planet moniker. And DC said something today on the MMA Hour that I thought was really interesting. He said, I took this fight because it gives me the opportunity to be the greatest of all time. And I thought, that's a little ridiculous. But then I look at the resume, not really. He's beaten everybody but John Jones, and he is 0-1-1 against John Jones, and that is not his fault. One of the loss was a 25-minute war. So, I mean, did he get knocked out in both fights? No, he got knocked out in one fight, and in the fight he got knocked out in, John Jones was juiced to the gills. Is that DC's fault? No. So, the John Jones stuff is really doesn't really matter. It really has no relevance to the situation at all, and that's why I think it's brilliant that the UFC did this. It puts John Jones away, tucks him in a corner, and Daniel Cormier is 39 years old, fighting at this high of a level. And realistically, if I'm DC, and I don't want to ruffle any more feathers, I know he wants to continue to fight, but he doesn't want to ruffle any more feathers in terms of sticking around at heavyweight and jump ahead of Cain long term. I think this is a short-term decision. If DC is moving up to heavyweight, I do not foresee him competing at light heavyweight ever again. He's moving back up. I don't think he has any interest in cutting weight. And my case in point, UFC 210 in Buffalo, I was there. He held the towel on that scale. He was not fully on that scale with his body weight. He was the 206-pound champ, as John Jones once said. So he doesn't want to cut weight anymore. And if he takes this challenge, which he's taking this challenge, he's moving up to heavyweight. If he wins this fight, DC should retire. There's nothing to prove, not to me. The guy's got nothing to prove. He did everything he could, and then some. You look at his resume, beat the who's who. Ragdoll Dan Henderson. Who has done that? I don't care if Dan Henderson was 46 years old in his last fight. Nobody ragdolls Dan Henderson. Daniel Cormier did that. Daniel Cormier also beat Anderson Silva. Daniel Cormier also beat Alexander Gustafsson, Rumble Johnson twice. Frank Mir, I alluded to his heavyweight wins. Ridiculous. His resume is unreal, and the story of how he got into the UFC, how he got into the sport of mixed martial arts. The guy's one of the greatest NCAA wrestlers of all time. That cannot be, or unappreciated. I remember hearing that he was interested in MMA, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be interesting. Will it work? Will he be able to survive? Will he make it? Probably the biggest name NCAA wrestler. In that era, there's two. One is Cael Sanderson, who never lost, who is the head coach for Penn State. They've won 6 straight NCAA championships. The other was Daniel Cormier, and DC had the closest match with Cael Sanderson that Cael Sanderson had ever had in his entire career. So there are so many feathers in the cap of Daniel Cormier that Cormier is still competing. He's still doing his thing. He's fighting in the UFC and doing it at a high level. And can he win this fight? Yes, he can. That's why the fight's getting made. It's a 50-50 fight. Can DC win? Yeah. Can Stipe win? Stipe is probably the favorite, I would say. If I were to pick, I'd say Stipe just beat the tar out of Francis Ngannou. DC is no Ngannou in terms of physicality, the specimen. But DC is a fundamentally sound fighter. His strengths are so dominant that it'll be very interesting to see that clash of the wrestling between DC and Miocic, because obviously Miocic is no slouch in the wrestling department either. Used that heavily against Ngannou, and he's used it throughout his career in prior fights. He really fell in love with that knockout punch. Stipe reminds me, he really is a more athletic, more well-rounded heavyweight Chuck Liddell. That's the what I see from Stipe. But he's the real deal. This guy is the true baddest man on the planet right now. And the fact that this fight is being put on, I think that it's great. I can't wait for July 7th. We might have 3 champion versus champion fights, according to the sources that I have inside the sport. We might have Miocic versus DC. We might have Demetrius Johnson versus TJ Dillashaw. We might have Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes, all on one night, July 7th for International Fight Week. Champion versus champion, 3 champion versus champion fights. Miocic, the heavyweight, versus the light heavyweight champ. Cormier, Mighty Mouse, the flyweight, versus TJ, the bantamweight. Cyborg, the women's featherweight, versus Amanda Nunes, the women's bantamweight. So, wow. TJ Dillashaw is moving down to flyweight. Amanda Nunes is moving up to featherweight. It's crazy. The UFC is at a crazy point right now. MMA is really, it's been amazing. It's been an awesome ride covering the sport the last few years, and I cannot wait to see this fight. I think that this is going to be a great fight. I think it's going to be a battle, and I'm excited to see these two guys on The Ultimate Fighter. I think they're both great gentlemen of the sport. I think they'll be able to give back quite a bit to the athletes that participate in the sport, in the toughest tournament in the world, in The Ultimate Fighter. And I love it. The best super fight to date in UFC history, in my opinion. Miocic versus Cormier. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take. Take care.